aspects that we used to teach this class a certain way was we actually began with an introduction. Now, this was years ago. I'm talking about A&P as far as this class is concerned. It used to be an introduction, and then I think we would talk about the skin, then the skeletal system, and then the muscular system. And then by that time, there might be time for one more chapter, and then it would be semesters. And then what we had decided is, I think you spent enough time with a lot of the introduction to what the human body, what I want to say, not necessarily how it works, but a lot of the structures in health class, because a lot of you have had health class. Is that correct? Okay. And one of the things that we had thought was when I was going to be gone for that extended amount of time was I think it would be easier for a replacement to, let's say, instruct the skeletal system and the muscular system, because from what we've learned so far from last chapter, or the digestive system, how is anatomy and physiology different? In other words, small intestine-wise, how is the anatomy of that different than the physiology of it? Or even with the stomach entering the small intestine? Yes?
Like, are you asking what's the difference between anatomy and physiology?
Yes.
Anatomy is like what the parts are, and then physiology is what they do.
And what they do and how it works. That's correct. Okay? So when we look at this, a lot of you probably could have answered that question knowing the skeletal system first, because when it comes to that of anatomy, it's just straight up memorization. Okay? There's no other way to get around learning the skeletal system other than memorizing it. Okay? And the reason we would say something like that is you could look at your upper forearm bone. Okay? Yes, that is your humerus, but that would not be the only identification that you would do for this bone up here. Okay? Now, maybe in health class, did you have to know different types of structures for that? Or just know that this is your humerus, your radius, your ulna, your scapula back here, your clavicle or collarbone? Did you just have to know the bones only? Yeah. Okay? And it'll be a little bit of time before we get there, but I'd be led to believe that there's probably 10 to 12 identifications that go with the humerus, as opposed to that is just your humerus bone. Okay? Because a lot of what happens is a bone is shaped the way it is because of the movement that it does. Because a lot of them can create levers. Okay? And then this is a specific joint, which would be, you ever heard of a ball and socket joint? That's what your shoulder is. So you have different types of projections that stick off of them, known as condyles or tubercles, because those are going to, when they stick out like that, it provides a site for muscle attachment, and that's how we move. But in this case, if you remember anything about your health class, why are there 12 pairs of cranial nerves? Because what does your peripheral system do? Is that in the middle, or is it branch away from the middle? It exactly does that. So this number, okay, where do you think you would find that goes right down the middle of your body? Ribs would be close, but not ribs. What do ribs attach to, do you think, on your back or posterior side? That's kind of like a vague term. That's right, because when you say spine, that's more so neurological tissue rather than skeletal tissue. What would be more specific, do you think? Okay, that's still neurological tissue. We want anatomical. How is that spinal cord protected? It's a type of column. You might have said spinal column, but we're looking for your vertebral column, okay, or vertebrae. You have 7 cervical vertebrae. You have 12 thoracic vertebrae that's in your torso. So that's where this comes from, okay? And when we had those cranial nerves up there, okay, some are mixed, some are purely sensory, others are primarily motor. Can you give me an example of a cranial nerve that is sensory only? But that's not a cranial nerve. What are your first 2 cranial nerves? That's one. An optic. So those are your senses. So those would be purely sensory cranial nerves. Others are primarily motor. So what's the 3rd cranial nerve? Oculomotor. It actually has it in the name. So that would be stimulating just muscles only. Then there are these that are mixed. I believe the vagus would be mixed. The trochlear or trigeminal, I believe, are mixed. So what does that mean when they are mixed? They do both, sensory and motor nerves. Okay, so does that close the door on what you would have to write down? I think it does. Is there any questions on those papers that I believe we said we would collect tomorrow? Not at this time? Okay. So like I said, I didn't have a whole lot to go over today, and rest of the time then is essentially yours. But please do not. And how many of you think that, gosh, if we keep getting instructed to memorize these cranial nerves, and you get it down this week, then when next week rolls around, do you think you may have forgotten by that time if you don't look at them again? Okay. And I don't know, or have you worked on how the process that works for you might go about it? That a little saying, or just associating what cranial nerves belong to which number. Like one of the things that I can tell you with certainty is that the 10th cranial nerve is the vagus nerve, okay? The 8th one is the vestibular cochlear. The first 3 start with an O, the next 2 with a T, okay? So now you're already halfway there. And the last one is a hypoglossal, and I believe the 11th one kind of reminds of a tie because it's an accessory. Okay. And I don't want to throw a whole lot out here that, oh geez. We're maybe already confused with a lot of this organic garbage. I don't know, why am I looking at you? Because you're not in the organic class. I find myself doing that. I ask questions to students that have absolutely nothing to do with what it is we're talking about. So we have enough headaches with this organic class. Hopefully that's becoming a little more clearer. But probably some of the biggest things from this chapter, the functions of the brain, especially in that autonomic nervous system. Why is it the autonomic nervous system? What does it break down into? And it's what we call a PNS, not the peripheral nervous system. Okay, a PNS and an SNS, and that's not somatic either. So in a stressful situation, the sympathetic nervous system, don't get that confused with somatic, and then what is the PNS besides the peripheral nervous system? Correct. just looking at them. That chart that I had sitting out, I thought. Do your computers go to sleep that quick too? Because I would say it's kind of annoying, but I don't know how to get around that. Okay. Any questions on your end at all? Left outside, we good? Left middle, right middle, middle, right middle, and then right outside. Yes? That's all I've got for today. We'll catch up to you next time. I see those papers are due. Tomorrow we'll just review those cranial nerves, and then we'll see how next week shakes out. Okay, that's all I got. Catch up to you next time.